Your mind is not your friend. Right now, this very second, your mind is generating thousands of thoughts that you did not ask for, do not need, and that actively work against your best interests. Your mind is constantly chattering, judging, worrying, remembering, fantasizing, and creating stories that have nothing to do with reality. And you believe all of it. You think these thoughts are you, that they represent truth, that you must listen to them and react to them. This is the fundamental delusion that keeps most people trapped in anxiety, confusion, and limited potential. Let me tell you something that will change everything. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are just mental events that arise and pass away in your consciousness. They have no inherent truth or power except what you give them. The voice in your head that never stops talking is not your true self. It is just a machine generating content based on conditioning, memories, fears, and random associations. Once you understand this, once you learn to create distance between yourself and your thoughts, everything changes. You gain power over your internal experience that most people never discover. You stop being controlled by mental chatter and start directing your consciousness intentionally. You break free from anxiety, overthinking, and self-doubt that plague people who remain identified with their thoughts. The most powerful people in every field have mastered the art of mental silence. Not because they have no thoughts, but because they have learned to observe thoughts without being controlled by them. They can quiet their minds at will, focus their attention with laser precision, and operate from a place of clarity rather than mental chaos. They have discovered what ancient wisdom traditions have taught for thousands of years, but modern psychology is only beginning to understand. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is power. In the space between thoughts, in the gaps of mental chatter, lies your true intelligence, your deepest wisdom, and your greatest creative capacity. But you cannot access this power while your mind is constantly generating noise. You must learn to master the silence. By the time you finish this audiobook, you will understand exactly how to quiet your mind, how to observe thoughts without being controlled by them, and how to access states of consciousness that give you power over your reality that seems almost supernatural to people trapped in mental chaos. You will learn the neuroscience of thought generation, the psychology of mental silence, and practical techniques used by elite performers to maintain clarity and control. This is not mystical nonsense or spiritual bypassing. This is practical psychology and neuroscience applied to giving you complete mastery over your inner world. When you control your thoughts, you control your emotions. When you control your emotions, you control your actions. When you control your actions, you control your results. Everything starts with learning to master the silence. Chapter 1: The Tyranny of the Thinking Mind and Why It Destroys Your Life. Your mind generates approximately 60,000 thoughts per day. Most of these thoughts are repetitive, negative, and completely useless. Your mind is not carefully considering important matters and generating brilliant insights. It is randomly rehashing the past, catastrophizing about the future, judging yourself and others, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios that will never happen, and creating problems that do not exist. This constant mental chatter is exhausting and destructive. It prevents you from being present in your actual life. It creates anxiety about things that never happen. It replays past events you cannot change. It judges everything and finds you inadequate. It generates worst-case scenarios and treats them as reality. Your thinking mind is essentially a problem-generating machine that creates suffering where none actually exists. Most people are completely identified with this mental chatter. They think they are their thoughts. When the mind says you are not good enough, they believe it. When the mind says something terrible will happen, they experience anxiety as if it is already happening. When the mind judges others, they accept that judgment as truth. This identification with thought is the source of most human psychological suffering. Let me explain what is actually happening neurologically. Your default mode network, a collection of brain regions that activate when you are not focused on external tasks, is constantly generating self-referential thoughts. This network evolved to help humans plan, remember, and simulate scenarios. But in modern life, it has become overactive and creates constant mental noise. The default mode network is essentially running on autopilot, generating content without your conscious direction. Most of this content is negative because your brain has a negativity bias. Evolution favored brains that scanned for threats and problems because missing a real threat could be fatal. But in modern life, where actual threats are rare, this negativity bias means your mind constantly generates negative thoughts about non-threatening situations. Your mind treats a difficult conversation like a life-threatening predator. It treats social rejection like physical danger. It treats uncertainty like crisis. Your emotional system responds to these thoughts as if they represent real threats, creating stress, anxiety, and fear about situations that are not actually dangerous. The problem is compounded by rumination, which is repetitively thinking about problems without moving toward solutions. When something goes wrong, or you face a challenge, your mind obsessively chews on it. You replay the situation over and over. Imagine what you should have done differently. Worry about future consequences and generate increasingly negative interpretations. This rumination feels productive because you are thinking about the problem. But it is not productive. It is just generating mental suffering without creating solutions. Research shows that rumination is strongly associated with depression, anxiety, and numerous other mental health problems. People who ruminate more are less happy, less effective, and more prone to psychological difficulties. Yet most people spend hours every day ruminating because they do not know how to stop. Another destructive pattern is catastrophizing, where your mind takes a situation and imagines the worst possible outcome, then treats that imagined outcome as likely or inevitable. Something goes slightly wrong at work, and your mind immediately jumps to, you will be fired, then you will not find another job, then you will lose your house, then you will end up homeless. This entire catastrophe exists only in your thoughts, but your emotional system responds as if it is real. You experience anxiety, stress, and fear about a completely imaginary scenario. Your mind also engages in constant comparison and judgment. It compares you to others and finds you lacking. It compares your current situation to some imagined ideal and finds reality inadequate. It judges your past actions as mistakes. It judges others to feel superior or to confirm negative beliefs. This constant comparison and judgment creates dissatisfaction with reality and prevents you from accepting what actually is. The internal narrator, that voice in your head that provides running commentary on everything, creates a false sense that you are separate from your experience. Instead of simply experiencing life, you are constantly thinking about your experience, narrating it, judging it, comparing it to other experiences. This creates a layer of mental abstraction between you and reality. You stop living your actual life and start living in your thoughts about your life. Most people have almost no awareness that any of this is happening. They are so identified with their thoughts that they cannot see the thinking process itself. They believe they are their thoughts, not the awareness in which thoughts appear. This is like believing you are the weather instead of the sky in which weather occurs. The weather changes constantly, but the sky remains unchanged. Similarly, thoughts change constantly, but the awareness in which thoughts appear is stable and unchanging. When you believe you are your thoughts, you have no freedom. Every thought that arises controls you. Negative thoughts create negative emotions, and you have no choice but to feel them. Anxious thoughts create anxiety, and you are powerless to stop it. Judgmental thoughts create negative views of yourself and others, and you believe those views represent truth. This is mental slavery. You are controlled by a random thought-generating machine that you mistake for yourself. The solution is not to stop thinking entirely. Thinking is useful for specific tasks like planning, problem solving, and analysis. The solution is to break the identification with thought so that you can use thinking as a tool when needed, but not be controlled by constant involuntary thinking. This means learning to observe thoughts as mental events separate from yourself. This means creating gaps of silence between thoughts, where you experience consciousness without mental content. This means developing the ability to direct your attention intentionally rather than having it constantly pulled by whatever thought arises. Most people will spend their entire lives as slaves to their thinking minds. They will suffer unnecessarily because they believe every thought their minds generate. They will miss their actual lives because they are lost in mental abstraction. They will never discover the peace, clarity, and power that exists in silence. Do not be most people. Understand that you are not your thoughts, that your thinking mind is just a tool you can use or set aside, and that your true power comes from the silent awareness beneath all mental noise. Chapter 2: The Neuroscience of Mental Silence and Consciousness. To master mental silence, you need to understand what is actually happening in your brain when you think versus when you experience silence. This is not mystical or spiritual. This is concrete neuroscience that explains exactly why silence is powerful and how you can access it. Your brain has several networks that compete for dominance. The default mode network, which I mentioned earlier, is active during mind-wandering and self-referential thinking. This network includes the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and other regions that create the sense of self and generate autobiographical thoughts. When this network is highly active, you are lost in thought, ruminating, worrying, or daydreaming. The task positive network, also called the executive control network, is active during focused attention on external tasks or specific problems. This network includes the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and parietal regions that direct attention and maintain focus. When this network is active, you are engaged with something outside your own mental chatter. The salience network, which includes the anterior cingulate cortex and insula, determines which network dominates at any given moment. It detects what is important or salient and shifts resources accordingly. In most people, the default mode network is overactive. It dominates consciousness most of the time, creating constant mind wandering and mental chatter. The person is rarely fully present or focused because their default mode network keeps pulling attention back into thoughts about self, past, and future. Brain imaging studies show fascinating differences between people who practice meditation or other silence training versus those who do not. Regular practitioners show decreased activity in default mode network regions during rest, meaning they have less intrusive mental chatter. They show increased connectivity between networks, meaning better ability to shift between focused attention and rest without getting stuck in rumination. They show structural changes with increased gray matter in regions associated with attention and decreased gray matter in regions associated with anxiety and stress. These are not minor differences. After just 8 weeks of meditation practice, people show measurable changes in brain structure and function. After years or decades of practice, the differences become dramatic. Long-term practitioners essentially have different brains than non-practitioners. The neuroscience reveals something crucial. Mental silence is not about having no neural activity. It is about shifting away from default mode network dominance toward other states of consciousness. When you experience mental silence, specific brain regions are less active while others may be more active. The key is that the constant self-referential thinking generated by the default mode network is quiet. Another important finding is about the relationship between thought and emotion. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection system, is closely connected to regions that generate thoughts about self and future. When you are stuck in negative thought patterns, your amygdala remains activated, creating chronic stress and anxiety. When you achieve mental silence, amygdala activity decreases. This is why silence produces such profound calm. You are literally quieting your brain's alarm system. The prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, can regulate both thought generation and emotional responses. When you strengthen this region through attention training, you gain better control over both your thoughts and emotions. This is the neural mechanism underlying mental mastery. Neurotransmitters also play crucial roles. GABA, your brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, is essential for quieting excessive neural activity. People with anxiety and overactive minds often have reduced GABA function. Practices that increase GABA, including meditation, breathing exercises, and certain types of movement, make mental silence more accessible. Serotonin supports mood regulation and contributes to feelings of contentment and peace that accompany mental silence. Dopamine, while important for motivation and focus, can also drive compulsive thinking when dysregulated. The dopamine system can become activated by rumination in ways that make overthinking almost addictive. Breaking this pattern requires understanding that thoughts are activating reward systems inappropriately. The anterior cingulate cortex deserves special attention. This region is involved in detecting conflict between goals and actions, monitoring for errors, and regulating attention. When this region functions well, you can catch yourself getting lost in thought and return to presence. When it functions poorly, you remain stuck in mental loops without awareness that you are stuck. You can strengthen anterior cingulate cortex function through specific practices. One key finding is about the relationship between brain activity and subjective experience. When people report experiencing mental silence, brain scans often show a specific pattern. Activity in language processing regions decreases, Activity in default mode, network regions decreases. Activity in sensory processing regions may increase. Activity in attention control regions shows specific patterns. This suggests that mental silence involves reducing linguistic and self-referential processing while potentially enhancing direct sensory awareness. The experience of being identified with thoughts versus observing thoughts corresponds to different patterns of neural activity. When identified with thoughts, there is strong coupling between different default mode network regions and emotional centers. When observing thoughts, there is increased activity in regions associated with metacognition and awareness, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, with decreased reactivity in emotional centers. Brain plasticity is crucial for developing mental silence. Your brain changes based on what you practice. If you practice being lost in thought, your brain becomes better at generating and being captured by thoughts. If you practice returning to silence, your brain becomes better at quieting the default mode network and maintaining presence. This is not metaphorical. Your actual neural structure, connectivity, and function change based on your mental practices. The good news is that these changes can happen relatively quickly. Measurable differences appear within weeks of consistent practice. The bad news is that they require consistent practice. You cannot achieve lasting changes through occasional effort. The research on expert meditators provides insight into what is possible. These individuals, with thousands or tens of thousands of hours of practice, show remarkable control over their brain states. They can enter profound states of silence at will. They can maintain these states for extended periods. They can shift between different states of consciousness flexibly. Brain imaging shows that their brains function fundamentally differently than untrained individuals. This is not because they have special genetics or rare abilities. It is because they have systematically trained their brains over many years. You can achieve similar results with similar practice. The level of mastery depends on how much time you are willing to invest in training. But even modest amounts of practice produce meaningful results. Understanding this neuroscience is empowering because it demystifies mental silence. This is not about achieving some special spiritual state. This is about changing your brain function through systematic training. You are not trying to empty your mind or stop thoughts permanently. You are training specific neural networks to function differently. This is practical, achievable, and based on solid science. Chapter 3. The practice of thought observation without identification. The fundamental skill underlying all mental silence is the ability to observe thoughts without identifying with them. This sounds simple, but it is radically different from how most people relate to their thoughts. Most people are completely fused with their thoughts. A thought arises, and they immediately believe it, react to it emotionally, and act on it. There is no space between the thought and their response. The thought and the self are experienced as one thing. Thought observation without identification means creating that space. You notice a thought arising. You recognize it as a thought, a mental event, not necessarily truth or reality. You observe it without immediately reacting. You let it pass without attaching to it. The thought comes and goes, while you remain as the stable awareness observing the thought. This might sound abstract, so let me give you concrete instructions for developing this skill. The basic practice is simple, but requires consistent repetition to master. Find a quiet place where you will not be disturbed for at least 10 minutes. Sit comfortably with your spine relatively straight. This is not about physical discipline, just about being alert rather than sleepy. Close your eyes or lower your gaze. Turn your attention inward towards your own mental activity. For the first few moments, just notice that thoughts are happening. Do not try to change them or stop them. Just observe that your mind is generating content, thoughts, images, memories, plans, judgments. Just notice this activity. Now begin to notice individual thoughts as they arise. When a thought appears, label it silently. Thinking. That is all. Just noting that thinking is happening. Not engaging with the content of the thought. Not judging it as good or bad. Just noting its presence. Thinking. The thought arises. Thinking. The thought passes. Another thought arises. Thinking. You note it and let it pass. Your mind will constantly try to pull you into the content of thoughts. You will start thinking and forget you were supposed to be observing. This is completely normal and will happen hundreds of times. When you notice you have been lost in thought, do not judge yourself. Simply note, lost in thought, and return to observing. This moment of noticing that you were lost in thought is actually the most important moment. This is when you are creating the separation between awareness and thought. You are recognizing that you are not the thoughts. You are the awareness that notices when you have been lost in thoughts. Initially, you might be lost in thought for long periods before you notice. That is fine. With practice, you will notice more quickly. Eventually, you will catch yourself getting pulled into thought before you fully engage with it. This is increasing your metacognitive awareness, your ability to be aware of your own mental processes. As you practice, you will start to notice patterns in your thinking. Certain thoughts repeat frequently. Certain themes dominate. Certain triggers reliably generate specific thoughts. This pattern recognition is valuable because it helps you see that your thoughts are not random truths. They are conditioned patterns that arise repeatedly. You might notice that whenever you think about a specific person, you have judgmental thoughts. This judgment is not truth about that person. It is a pattern your mind has learned. Recognizing this weakens the power of those judgmental thoughts. You might notice that your mind constantly returns to worrying about a particular situation. This worry is not useful problem solving. It is a habitual pattern. Recognizing this allows you to stop fueling the worry with attention. An advanced variation of this practice is noting the emotional charge of thoughts. Some thoughts are neutral and pass easily. Others carry strong emotional energy and hook your attention. When you notice a thought with strong emotional charge, you can note it specifically. Angry thought, anxious thought, sad thought. This labeling helps you see that the emotion is attached to the thought, not necessarily to your current reality. You are not angry. There is a thought with anger attached to it. This is a crucial distinction. Another useful variation is noting the time orientation of thoughts. Past thoughts are memories or regrets about things that already happened. Future thoughts are plans or worries about things that have not happened. Present thoughts are about current experience. Most people spend almost no time in present thoughts. Their minds are constantly in past or future. When you note past thought or future thought, you become aware of how much time you spend mentally absent from your actual life. You are not in the present moment. You are lost in thoughts about other times. Yet another variation is noting the reality status of thoughts. Some thoughts are accurate descriptions of actual situations. Other thoughts are interpretations, judgments, or fantasies that are not actually real. Noting story, or judgment, or fantasy helps you distinguish between thoughts that reflect reality and thoughts that create fictional narratives. The key to all these practices is consistency. You need to practice daily, ideally for at least 10 to 20 minutes, for several weeks before the skill becomes strong. In the beginning, it will feel difficult and frustrating. You will be lost in thought constantly. Your mind will seem more active and chaotic than before you started practicing. This is normal. You are not making your mind worse. You are just becoming aware of how chaotic it always was. As you continue practicing, you will notice changes. Thoughts become easier to observe without getting hooked. Gaps of silence between thoughts become more frequent. When you do get lost in thought, you notice more quickly. The quality of your thinking changes. Repetitive, useless thinking decreases, while more useful thinking can happen when needed. You might find yourself spontaneously observing thoughts during daily life, not just during formal practice. You catch yourself overthinking and can step back. You notice anxious thoughts arising and recognize them as thoughts rather than reality. You see judgmental thoughts and do not automatically believe them. This is the skill, transferring from practice into everyday life. This is when the real power becomes available. You are no longer at the mercy of every thought your mind generates. You have space to choose whether to engage with a thought or let it pass. This space is freedom. This is where mental mastery begins. Chapter 4. Creating gaps of silence in the noise of mind. Once you have developed basic thought observation skills, the next level is actively creating and extending gaps of silence between thoughts. These gaps are where your true power lives. In the silence between thoughts, you are free. You are present. You are available to reality as it actually is, rather than as your thoughts interpret it. Most people experience silence only accidentally and briefly. A moment of awe in nature where thought stops. A moment of intense focus where the mental chatter disappears. These moments are precious but rare for untrained minds. You need to learn to create silence intentionally and extend it for as long as you choose. The fundamental technique is using focal points to anchor attention and prevent thought generation. A focal point is anything that can hold your attention without generating conceptual thinking. The most accessible focal point is your breath. Breathing is always happening, always available, always in the present moment. When your attention is fully absorbed in the direct sensation of breathing, thought generation slows or stops. Here is how to practice. Sit or lie comfortably. Close your eyes. Bring your attention to the physical sensations of breathing. Not thinking about breathing, but feeling the actual sensations. The air moving through your nostrils, the expansion and contraction of your chest or belly, the subtle sensations throughout your torso as you breathe. Place your attention fully on these sensations. When a thought arises, gently return your attention to the breath sensations. You are not fighting thoughts or trying to forcefully stop them. You are simply choosing to place your attention on breath rather than on thoughts. Initially, thoughts will constantly pull your attention away. That is expected. You bring your attention to breath. Within seconds, a thought arises. You notice you are thinking. You return to breath. This happens over and over. This is the practice. Each time you return your attention to breath, You are weakening the habit of being lost in thought and strengthening the ability to rest in silence. With consistent practice, several things happen. Your attention becomes more stable on the breath. You can maintain focus for longer periods before thoughts pull you away. When thoughts do arise, you notice more quickly and return to breath sooner. Periods of silence where no thoughts arise become more frequent. These silence periods extend from moments to seconds to eventually longer durations. The breath is just one focal point. You can use body sensations, sounds, visual objects, or any other present moment experience. The key is that the focal point must be experiential, something you directly sense, not conceptual, something you think about. When you focus on the direct sensation of your hand resting on your leg, this can anchor you in silence. When you start thinking about your hand, you have left the focal point and returned to thought. An advanced practice is using the sense of I am or pure awareness itself as a focal point. This is more subtle and requires significant practice with other focal points first. You place attention on the feeling of being aware, the sense of existing, without attaching that awareness to any particular object or thought. This is sometimes called resting as awareness or being the witness. In this state, you are conscious, but not conscious of anything in particular. You are awareness aware of itself. This produces the deepest silence because there is no content of consciousness at all, just consciousness itself. Another approach to creating silence is using koans, or paradoxical questions that stop conceptual thinking. The classic example is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Your conceptual mind cannot answer this. When you genuinely hold this question in attention, trying to directly experience the answer rather than think about it, conceptual thinking stops. The mind falls silent because it cannot process the paradox. Different traditions use different techniques, but they all aim at the same result: stopping the compulsive thought-generating process and resting in silence. You should experiment with different focal points and techniques to find what works best for you. Some people find breath focus easy and natural. Others find it frustrating and prefer body sensations or sound. The specific technique matters less than consistent practice with whatever technique you choose. As you develop the ability to create silence, you need to also learn to extend it. In the beginning, silence might last only a moment before thoughts return. With practice, you can maintain silence for minutes, or eventually much longer. The key to extending silence is not effortful concentration that exhausts you. It is relaxed, sustained attention. You are not trying hard to prevent thoughts. You are simply choosing to rest in silence and gently returning when thoughts arise. This requires a light touch. Too much effort creates tension that generates more thought. Too little attention, and you drift into mind wandering. The balance is sustained but relaxed attention. You will also need to work with the fear or discomfort that often arises during extended silence. Your ego, your sense of self, constructed from thoughts, feels threatened by silence. When thinking stops, the ego cannot maintain itself. This can create anxiety or a feeling that something is wrong. You need to recognize this discomfort as the ego's resistance and continue resting in silence despite it. The discomfort will pass. What remains is profound peace. Extended silence also reveals how addicted most people are to thought. Thinking is compulsive behavior for most humans. They cannot stop even when they want to. As you practice creating silence, you will directly experience how strong the compulsion to think is. Thoughts will arise constantly trying to pull you away from silence. This is not failure. This is revealing the true state of the untrained mind. Your success is measured not by whether thoughts arise, but by how quickly you notice them and return to silence. Each return to silence is a repetition that strengthens the neural pathways of mental mastery. Over time, silence becomes more accessible and more stable. You can drop into silence easily, even in the middle of daily activity. You can maintain silence for extended periods during formal practice. You can move in and out of silence flexibly as needed. This flexibility is the goal. Not permanent silence which would make you non-functional, but the ability to choose silence when you want it and useful thinking when you need it. Chapter 5. The relationship between silence thought and reality. Most people believe their thoughts accurately represent reality. They think that what they perceive and interpret through thought is what actually exists. This is fundamentally false, and understanding why is crucial for mental mastery. Your thoughts are not reality. They are interpretations, stories, and constructions that your mind creates based on sensory input, filtered through conditioning, beliefs, fears, and desires. Reality exists independent of your thoughts about it. When you are silent and present, you can experience reality more directly. When you are lost in thought, you are experiencing your mental constructions about reality, not reality itself. Let me give you a concrete example. You are having a conversation with someone, and they say something ambiguous. Your mind immediately generates thoughts, interpreting their words. They are criticizing me. They do not respect me. They are being passive-aggressive. These thoughts feel like truth. They trigger emotional reactions. You respond based on these thoughts. But these thoughts are interpretations, not facts. The actual reality is just words that were spoken. Everything else is your mental construction. If you could be silent and present, you would simply hear the words without immediately layering interpretation on them. You could ask for clarification rather than reacting to your interpretation. You could respond to what actually was said rather than to your thoughts about what was said. This capacity to distinguish between direct experience and mental interpretation is transformative. Suddenly, you are not constantly reacting to your own stories. You are responding to reality as it actually is. Another example involves memory and past events. You think about something that happened in the past, and you believe you are remembering reality. But neuroscience shows that memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Every time you remember something, you are constructing it again from fragments. And the construction is influenced by your current state, beliefs, and context. Your memory of a past event is not the event itself. It is a current mental construction influenced by everything that has happened since. When you treat this construction as truth, you are responding to thoughts, not reality. The same applies to future-oriented thinking. You worry about something that might happen. Your mind creates detailed scenarios of possible futures. These scenarios feel real. They trigger stress and anxiety. But they are not reality. They are imagined stories. The future that actually happens will be different from any scenario your mind creates. Yet you suffer based on these imagined scenarios as if they were real. Silence allows you to see this clearly. In silence, you are in the present moment, where reality actually exists. Past and future are not accessible directly. They are accessible only through thought. When you are silent, you realize that you only ever have now. Everything else is mental construction. This is not nihilism or denial that past and future matter. It is recognizing that your direct experience of reality only happens now, and thoughts about past and future are different from actual past and future. The stories your mind tells about yourself are particularly powerful constructions that most people mistake for truth. You have thoughts about who you are, what you are capable of, what your limitations are, what you deserve. These thoughts form a self-concept that feels absolutely real, but it is just thought. Beneath these thoughts, who are you actually? In silence, when the thoughts about self quiet, what remains? Most people never ask this question because they are so identified with their thoughts about themselves that they cannot imagine looking beneath them. But in deep silence, the self-concept dissolves. What remains is pure awareness, consciousness without content, the witnessing presence that exists before and beneath all thoughts about self. This is your true nature, not the thoughts you have about yourself, just awareness itself. This realization is profoundly liberating because all the limitations you believe about yourself are just thoughts. They are not truth. In silence, you access a sense of self that is unlimited, unconditioned, and free. Understanding the relationship between silence, thought, and reality also reveals how much suffering is created purely by thought. Actual pain exists. Actual difficulties exist. But the suffering we experience is largely generated by our thoughts about pain and difficulty. You experience physical pain, and your mind generates thoughts about how terrible this is, how long it will last, what it means about your health, whether you can cope. These thoughts create suffering beyond the actual pain. In silence, without the layer of thought, pain exists, but suffering dramatically decreases. The same pattern applies to all difficult experiences. The actual situation exists. Thoughts about the situation create most of the suffering. This is why people in identical external circumstances can have completely different experiences. The circumstances are not determining their experience. Their thoughts about circumstances are. Two people lose their jobs. One person spirals into depression because their mind generates catastrophic thoughts about the loss. Another person sees it as an opportunity because their mind generates different thoughts. The external situation is the same. The experience is completely different based on thought. But here is the key insight. Both people are creating their experience through thought. Neither is experiencing reality directly. In silence, without compulsive thinking, you can respond to job loss from a place of clarity rather than from either catastrophic thoughts or artificially optimistic thoughts. You can see the situation clearly and choose your response wisely. This is not about positive thinking, replacing negative thinking. It is about accessing a state of consciousness that is prior to both positive and negative thinking. From silence, you can choose to think when thinking is useful. You can analyze your situation, make plans, solve problems. But you are using thought as a tool rather than being used by automatic thought patterns. This relationship with reality through silence, rather than through compulsive thinking, gives you tremendous power. You stop being jerked around by every thought that arises. You stop suffering based on imaginary scenarios. You stop reacting to interpretations rather than facts. You start living in reality as it actually is, rather than in your mental constructions about reality. Chapter 6. Silence as the Foundation of Emotional Mastery. Your emotions are not caused by external situations. They are caused by your thoughts about situations. This is the fundamental insight that changes everything about emotional control. Most people believe that situations make them angry, sad, anxious, or happy. Someone does something, and you feel angry. You think the person's action caused your anger. But this is not accurate. The person's action happened. Your mind generated thoughts interpreting that action as wrong, disrespectful, or threatening. Those thoughts triggered anger. The action did not cause the anger. Your thoughts about the action caused the anger. This distinction is crucial because if situations cause emotions, you are powerless. You cannot control what happens. But if thoughts cause emotions, you have power. You can influence your thoughts, especially when you develop mental silence. Let me explain the exact mechanism. Something happens in your environment. Sensory information reaches your brain. Before you have any conscious awareness, your brain has already started processing this information through pattern matching based on past experience. Within milliseconds, your brain categorizes the situation and generates an initial interpretation. This interpretation, which is essentially a thought, triggers neurochemical and physiological changes that you experience as emotion. All of this happens so fast that it seems like the situation directly causes the emotion. But there is always thought mediating between situation and emotion. Most people are not aware of the thoughts that trigger their emotions because the thoughts are automatic and unconscious. They happen below the level of conscious awareness. This is why it seems like situations directly cause emotions. You are not aware of the interpretive thoughts between stimulus and emotional response. Mental silence training makes you aware of these automatic thoughts. As you develop the ability to observe thoughts, you start noticing the thoughts that arise in response to situations. You see the interpretation happening before the emotion emerges. Once you see this process, you gain power over it. You can question the interpretation. Is this thought actually true? Are there other ways to interpret this situation? Do I need to believe this thought? When you create space between the triggering situation and your reaction through silence, you can choose your interpretation consciously rather than accepting automatic interpretations. This choice transforms your emotional life. Let me give you concrete examples. Someone criticizes your work. Your automatic thought might be, they think I am incompetent. I am not good enough. This thought triggers shame and defensiveness. But in the gap of silence before reaction, you can question this thought. Is this criticism accurate feedback that could help me improve? Is this person having a bad day and their criticism is more about them than me? You can choose an interpretation that does not trigger destructive emotions. Your child misbehaves. Your automatic thought might be, they are disrespecting me. I am failing as a parent. This triggers anger and anxiety. In silence, you can see these thoughts and choose differently. They are a child learning to regulate their behavior. This is normal development, not a reflection of my worth as a parent. Different interpretation, different emotional response. This is not about deluding yourself with positive thoughts. It is about recognizing that your automatic interpretations are not necessarily true, and you can examine situations more objectively without the filter of compulsive thinking. Silence also allows you to experience emotion without the layer of thought that amplifies emotion. When you feel anxious, and you notice the anxiety without generating thoughts about the anxiety is much more manageable. When you generate thoughts like this, anxiety is terrible. I cannot handle this. Something is wrong with me. The anxiety amplifies and persists. The emotion plus thoughts about the emotion create a feedback loop that intensifies suffering. In silence, you feel emotion as pure sensation in your body without the narrative your mind wants to attach. This is incredibly liberating. Emotions become temporary physiological states that arise and pass, rather than all-consuming experiences that define your reality. You can experience sadness without the story about why you are sad or what the sadness means about your life. You can experience anger without the story about how wronged you were or how terrible the other person is. The emotion exists, but it does not consume you because you are not feeding it with compulsive thinking. This capacity to hold emotions in silence without amplifying them through thought is the foundation of emotional mastery. You are not suppressing emotions or pretending they do not exist. You are experiencing them fully, but without the mental elaboration that turns temporary emotions into persistent suffering. Advanced practitioners can actually observe emotions arising before they fully form. They notice the subtle physiological changes that precede full emotional activation. In this early stage, they can often prevent full emotion from developing by not engaging the thoughts that would fuel it. This is not emotional suppression. This is recognizing that you do not need to fully elaborate every emotional response your system wants to generate. Silence also reveals that much of what you think are emotions are actually just thoughts. You think you are anxious, but when you examine your direct experience, you might find just some mild tension in your chest and a lot of thoughts about bad things that might happen. The thoughts are creating the subjective experience of anxiety more than actual physiological activation. When you drop into silence and let the thoughts go, the so-called anxiety often dissolves because it was mostly mental construction. This is true for many emotions. What you think is anger might be just tension and thoughts of judgment. What you think is sadness might be just low energy and thoughts about what you have lost. The thoughts create and sustain the emotion. Without the thoughts, the raw sensation is much less intense and it passes quickly. Understanding this gives you tremendous emotional freedom. You are not controlled by emotions because you see that emotions are largely thoughts with physiological components, and you can choose whether to engage the thoughts that create and sustain emotions. You still feel emotions. You are not emotionally dead or disconnected, but you are not overwhelmed or controlled by emotions because you maintain the silence beneath emotional reactions. You remain as awareness within which emotions arise and pass like weather patterns. The weather does not disturb the sky. Emotions do not disturb the silent awareness that is your true nature. Chapter 7. Using silence to access deep intelligence and creativity. Your thinking mind is not your only intelligence. In fact, your thinking mind is often inferior to deeper forms of intelligence that only become accessible in silence. The constant mental chatter actually blocks access to your deepest wisdom, most creative insights, and clearest intuition. Most people have experienced moments of insight that arise not from thinking, but from silence. You struggle with a problem through analysis and effort. You get nowhere. You let go, stop thinking about it. Your mind falls silent. Suddenly, the solution appears fully formed. This is not random. This is your deeper intelligence providing an answer that your thinking mind could not access. Your thinking mind is limited to recombining information you already have through known logical processes. It is excellent for certain types of problems, but it cannot produce genuinely novel insights. Novel insights come from deeper processing that happens beneath conscious awareness when your mind is silent. Let me explain what is happening. Your brain has massive parallel processing capacity operating beneath conscious awareness. When you think consciously, you are using serial processing, one thought after another. This is very limited bandwidth. Meanwhile, your unconscious is processing vast amounts of information simultaneously. When you stop the conscious thinking and fall into silence, you give your unconscious space to deliver results of its processing to consciousness. The solution to your problem was being worked on beneath awareness. But as long as your conscious mind was busy chattering, the solution could not break through. When silence creates an opening, the solution emerges into consciousness. This is why insights often come during activities that quiet the thinking mind. In the shower, during walks, while falling asleep, or waking up, during meditation. These are times when conscious thinking quiets and deeper intelligence can communicate. Many of history's greatest breakthroughs came this way. Einstein described his insights about relativity arising not from logical thinking, but from images and feelings that appeared in states of reverie. Mozart reported hearing entire symphonies fully formed in moments of silence rather than constructing them note by note through thinking. Many scientists, artists, and inventors report similar experiences. Their greatest work came not from thinking harder, but from accessing silence and allowing deeper intelligence to deliver insights. You can learn to access this deliberately. When facing a complex problem, instead of thinking harder, you can practice loading the problem into your conscious mind through focused analysis, then releasing it into silence through meditation or other silence practices. This is a form of incubation. Your deeper intelligence works on the problem while your conscious mind is silent. Often within hours or days, solutions emerge. This is far more effective than grinding away with conscious thinking alone. Creative work particularly benefits from silence. When you try to force creativity through conscious effort, you produce derivative combinations of existing ideas. When you work from silence, allowing creative impulses to arise spontaneously rather than trying to control them, you produce genuinely original work. The creative state is one where thinking mind is quiet and you are open to what wants to emerge through you. Many artists describe this as channeling or flow states where they are not consciously creating, but simply allowing creation to happen through them. This is accessing intelligence beyond thinking mind. Intuition is another form of intelligence that only functions in silence. Intuition is your capacity to know things directly, without reasoning or evidence. Your intuition is constantly providing guidance, but most people cannot hear it because their thinking mind is too loud. In silence, intuitive knowing becomes clear. You know what decision to make, not through analysis of pros and cons, but through direct felt sense. You know whether someone is trustworthy, not through evaluation of evidence, but through immediate knowing. This intuitive intelligence is accessing information that your thinking mind cannot access. It synthesizes subtle cues, integrates vast experience, and processes complexity beyond conscious capacity. But it communicates through feelings and direct knowing, not through words and logic. If you are always in thinking mode, you never hear intuitive guidance. In silence, intuition becomes a powerful navigation system. Learning to distinguish between genuine intuition and random thoughts or fears requires practice. Genuine intuition has a quality of quiet certainty. It does not argue or justify itself. It simply knows. Thoughts masquerading as intuition are usually loud, argumentative, and emotion-laden. True intuition is calm and clear, even when it conveys challenging information. Silence also allows access to what some call universal intelligence or collective wisdom. When your individual thinking mind quiets, you can tap into intelligence that transcends your personal knowledge and experience. This sounds mystical, but many people across cultures and traditions report experiences of this. In deep silence, insights arise that you did not consciously generate and that reflect understanding beyond your personal learning. Whether you interpret this as accessing your own deeper unconscious, connecting with collective human wisdom, or something else depends on your framework. The experience itself is what matters. In silence, you access intelligence beyond your thinking mind. Practical application of this involves learning to work from silence. Instead of thinking your way through challenges, you learn to enter silence, hold the challenge in awareness without thinking about it, and remain open to whatever insights arise. This is counterintuitive because we are trained to solve problems through analysis and effort. But for complex problems with no clear logical path, silence is often more effective than thinking. The key is distinguishing between when to think and when to be silent. Routine problems with clear logical solutions benefit from thinking. Novel, complex problems often require silence to access deeper intelligence. Strategic decisions benefit from combining analysis with silences where intuition can inform thinking. Creative work requires primarily silence, with thinking used only to organize and express what emerges from silence. Learning to fluidly move between thinking and silence based on what the situation requires is advanced mental mastery. You are not abandoning thinking. You are augmenting thinking with silence-based intelligence that produces capabilities far beyond thinking alone. Chapter 8: Silence in Action and Mastering Presence. True mental silence is not just sitting in meditation with eyes closed. It is the capacity to maintain silence and presence during activity. This is where mental mastery becomes practical power in daily life. Presence means your attention is fully with what you are doing right now, rather than scattered across past and future thinking. Most people are never fully present. While doing one thing, they are thinking about the next thing, reviewing the last thing, worrying about something unrelated. Their attention is fragmented, and they are never fully engaged with their actual experience. Presence arises naturally from silence. When thinking quiets, you are present by default, because there is nothing pulling your attention away from now. But maintaining this presence during the demands of daily life requires specific training. The first practice is single-task presence. Choose a routine activity: washing dishes, folding laundry, walking. Commit to being fully present with just that activity. When thoughts arise, pulling you toward past, future, or unrelated concerns, return your attention to the direct sensory experience of what you are doing. Feel the warm water on your hands. Notice the texture of fabric. Feel your feet touching the ground with each step. This seems simple, but it is radically different from how most people operate. They wash dishes while planning tomorrow or reviewing today. They are physically washing dishes, but mentally elsewhere. You are training to be where you are, to do what you are doing with full attention. This single task presence is challenging because the mind constantly wants to escape the simplicity of the present moment. It finds present experience boring and generates thoughts about more interesting past or future. Your practice is recognizing this pattern and choosing presence anyway. The discipline is gentle, but persistent. You do not fight thoughts. You simply notice them and return attention to present experience. As this capacity strengthens, you can extend it to more complex activities, having conversations with full presence rather than thinking about what you will say next while the other person is speaking. Working on projects with full attention on the task rather than part of your mind wandering to other concerns. Exercising with full awareness of your body rather than distracting yourself with entertainment or thought. This full presence transforms the quality of everything you do. Work becomes more efficient and produces better results. Relationships deepen when you give people full attention. Physical activities become more enjoyable and safer when you are fully present with your body. Life itself becomes richer when you are actually there to experience it. Advanced practice involves maintaining silence and presence during emotionally activated situations. This is much harder than maintaining presence during neutral activities. When someone criticizes you, your mind wants to think about their criticism, defend yourself, judge them. Maintaining presence and silence means experiencing the situation directly without immediately layering thought on it. When you receive bad news, your mind wants to spin into thoughts about implications, worst-case scenarios, how unfair this is. Presence means experiencing your initial emotional response without adding layers of catastrophic thinking. When you are in conflict, your mind wants to think about how wrong the other person is, what you should say next, how to win the argument. Presence means staying with direct experience of the interaction rather than getting lost in thought. This requires significant capacity because emotion creates strong pull toward thinking. Your system believes thinking will solve the problem or protect you. It takes training to recognize that silent presence is often more effective than compulsive thinking. The key is practice. You start with easy situations and gradually work with more challenging ones. You build the neural pathways and psychological strength to remain present under increasing stress and activation. What was impossible becomes possible with training. Another aspect of presence is temporal orientation. Most people spend minimal time in the present. They are either lost in past-oriented thought, regret, nostalgia, analysis of what happened, or lost in future-oriented thought, planning, worrying, fantasizing. Presence means recognizing when your mind has left the present and consciously returning, not because past and future are unimportant, but because you can only act now, experience now, live now. Thinking about past and future has its place, but when it becomes compulsive and constant, you miss your actual life. Training temporal presence involves noticing when thoughts have pulled you away from now and returning. You notice you are thinking about yesterday. Return to now. You notice you are worrying about tomorrow. Return to now. This return to now is the practice. Presence also involves spatial grounding. Most people live almost entirely in their heads. Their attention is consumed by thought, and they have minimal awareness of their physical body and environment. Presence includes feeling your body from within, noticing you are breathing, Your heart is beating. Your body has weight and takes up space. Noticing your physical environment, colors, sounds, smells, textures. This sensory awareness anchors you in present reality versus abstract thought reality. Regular body awareness practices support this. Brief moments throughout your day where you bring attention into your body, feeling it from within, noticing sensations. This simple practice dramatically increases presence and decreases compulsive thinking. The fruit of mastering presence is that your life becomes vivid, immediate, and real rather than filtered through mental abstraction. You are actually here for your life rather than lost in thought about your life. This sounds simple, but it is profound. Most people go through life only partly present, partly here, partly paying attention. Full presence is a completely different quality of experience. Chapter 9. Transcending the ego through silence. Your ego, your sense of being a separate self with a particular identity, is maintained through thought. When thinking stops in deep silence, the ego structure temporarily dissolves. This is not theoretical. This is direct experience available to anyone who develops deep enough silence capacity. Understanding the ego and its relationship to thought and silence is crucial for advanced mental mastery. The ego is essentially a thought structure. It is the collection of thoughts you have about yourself, your history, your characteristics, your place in the world. This thought structure creates the felt sense of being a particular person separate from everything else. But this is constructed, not fundamental. At the deepest level, you are not this thought-constructed identity. You are the awareness in which thoughts, including thoughts about self, appear. The ego serves important practical functions. It allows you to navigate the world as an individual. It maintains memory and learning across time. It creates the organizational structure needed for practical living. The problem is not that ego exists. The problem is complete identification with ego, such that you believe you are only the ego and nothing more. This identification creates suffering through several mechanisms. The ego is inherently insecure because it is just thoughts, and thoughts are ephemeral. The ego needs constant reinforcement through achievement, recognition, comparison, and validation. When the ego feels threatened, defensive and aggressive patterns activate. The ego is separate by definition, which creates fundamental sense of isolation and disconnection. In deep silence, you can experience consciousness beyond ego. Without thoughts about self, who are you? The surprising discovery is that you still exist as aware presence, but without the thoughts that define you as separate. You experience awareness itself, consciousness without content, being without the limitation of being someone in particular. This is sometimes described as true self versus ego self. Your true self is the awareness that exists prior to thoughts. Your ego self is the thought-constructed identity. Most people know only ego self because they never experience silence deep enough to contact awareness beyond thought. The experience of transcending ego in silence is liberating. All the insecurity, defensiveness, need for validation that characterize ego temporarily disappear. You do not need to be anyone or prove anything. You are just awareness being aware. There is no separation. Boundaries dissolve. You experience connection with everything because the sense of separate self dissolves. This is the mystical experience reported across spiritual traditions. Not beliefs or wishful thinking, but direct experience of consciousness beyond ego. Importantly, this is temporary. After deep silence, you return to ego functioning, which is necessary for practical life. But having experienced beyond ego changes your relationship with ego. You know directly that you are not only the ego. The ego becomes a useful tool rather than your entire identity. This shift has practical implications. You take yourself less seriously. The stories ego tells about who you are and what you need no longer control you completely. You can observe ego reactions without being fully identified with them. When ego feels threatened and wants to defend itself, you can recognize this is ego reacting, not your deepest truth. You have space to choose whether to engage ego patterns or respond differently. The practice of contacting awareness beyond ego involves going deeper into silence than basic thought observation. You are not just observing thoughts. You are settling into the awareness that observes thoughts. What is aware of thoughts? That awareness. Can you rest as that awareness rather than as the content of thoughts? This is subtle and requires guidance and significant practice to access reliably. But glimpses are available to anyone who practices silence deeply. Even brief glimpses change everything. You know directly that you are not just your thoughts about yourself. This knowing provides freedom from ego identification even when you return to ego functioning. Some people fear that transcending ego means becoming passive, losing ambition, not caring about anything. This is not accurate. Ego transcendence does not eliminate functionality. It liberates you from ego-based suffering while allowing you to act effectively in the world. You can pursue goals without needing them for ego validation. You can engage relationships without ego neediness. You can create and contribute without ego, driving everything. The energy freed from ego maintenance and defense becomes available for more useful purposes. The challenge is that ego resists transcendence. Ego wants to maintain itself and sees silence as threatening. This is why deep silence practice often triggers resistance, fear, and discomfort. Ego is fighting for survival. You need to understand this dynamic and practice anyway. The discomfort is ego resistance, not genuine danger. The ego will generate thoughts about how silence is pointless. You are wasting time. You should be doing something else. These are ego trying to protect itself. Recognize them and continue practicing. Transcending ego does not happen suddenly or permanently. It is a gradual process of disidentification, where you spend less time completely fused with ego, and more time aware of ego as one aspect of experience, but not your total identity. This shift happens through accumulation of experiences where you contact awareness beyond ego through deep silence. Each experience weakens ego identification slightly. Over time, the effect accumulates into fundamental shift in how you experience yourself. Chapter 10. Silence as the foundation for conscious choice. Free will, your capacity to choose your actions consciously rather than being controlled by conditioning and impulse, requires mental silence. Without silence, you are largely on autopilot, reacting based on habitual patterns rather than choosing based on awareness. Most people believe they are choosing their actions when actually they are just executing conditioning. A situation triggers automatic thoughts. Those thoughts trigger automatic emotions. Those emotions trigger habitual actions. This entire chain happens so fast that it seems like you are choosing, but you are just running programs. Mental silence creates the space where real choice becomes possible. Between trigger and response, silence allows you to see what is happening and choose consciously rather than react automatically. This is the difference between responding and reacting. Reacting is automatic, unconscious, and conditioned. Responding is conscious, intentional, and free. The path from reaction to response runs through silence. When something happens, instead of immediately thinking about it, you can pause in silence. In that pause, awareness illuminates the situation. You see your habitual pattern trying to activate. You see the automatic thoughts and emotions arising. You see the conditioned response wanting to execute. Seeing all of this creates choice. Do I want to follow this habitual pattern? Or do I want to respond differently? Without silence, you do not see any of this. You just react, and later maybe notice you reacted in ways you did not want. The silence pause is the moment of power. This is where freedom lives. Let me give concrete examples. Someone insults you. Your automatic pattern is defensive anger. But if you can pause in silence before reacting, you might see that this person's opinion does not actually matter to you, that defensive anger serves no useful purpose, that a calm, non-reactive response is more powerful. With that awareness, you can choose calm response rather than automatically reacting with anger. You face a temptation. Your automatic pattern is to give in. But if you pause in silence, you might see that the short-term pleasure is not worth the long-term consequences, that your deeper values point toward resisting, that you have the capacity to choose differently. With that awareness, you can choose aligned with your values rather than automatically following impulse. You experience criticism. Your automatic pattern is to dismiss it defensively. But in silence, you might see that the criticism contains useful feedback, that your defensiveness is ego protecting itself unnecessarily, that you could benefit from considering the criticism objectively. With that awareness, you can choose to listen rather than automatically defending. The pattern is always the same. Automatic reactions run when you are identified with thinking, and there is no space between trigger and response. Conscious choice becomes possible when silence creates space where awareness can illuminate what is happening. This capacity for conscious choice is what makes humans different from simpler organisms that are purely stimulus-response machines. But most humans do not use this capacity because they have not developed the silence that enables it. Developing choice capacity requires training in several areas. First, you need basic thought observation skills so you can see automatic thoughts and patterns. Second, you need the ability to create pauses of silence in real time, not just during meditation. Third, you need to strengthen the neural pathways associated with executive control and inhibition. Fourth, you need values clarity, so you know what you want to choose in alignment with. The silence pause becomes a practice. When you notice yourself getting triggered or about to react, you pause. You take a breath. You create even a moment of silence. In that moment, you bring conscious awareness to the situation instead of automatically reacting. Initially, you will often notice only after you have already reacted. That is fine. Noticing after is the first step. As you practice, you will notice sooner. Eventually, you notice early enough to pause before reacting. Eventually, the pause becomes automatic, and you operate from conscious response rather than automatic reaction most of the time. This transforms every aspect of life. Relationships improve because you respond with awareness rather than reacting from triggers. Decision-making improves because you choose based on values and wisdom rather than impulse. Emotional life stabilizes because you are not jerked around by every stimulus. Work effectiveness increases because you act from intention rather than distraction. The freedom that comes from this is profound. You are no longer controlled by conditioning. You are no longer a puppet of circumstances and triggers. You are consciously choosing your responses based on awareness. This is what true freedom means. Not freedom from external constraints, but freedom to choose how you respond to anything that happens. Some situations require fast action where extensive pause is not practical. In these cases, your training shows up as automatic wise response rather than automatic conditioned reaction. When you have trained extensively in conscious response through silence, your automatic responses shift to be more aligned with wisdom, even when there is no time for deliberate choice. This is why martial artists train extensively. In actual combat, there is no time for thought. But their training means their automatic responses are skillful rather than panicked. The same principle applies to mental training. You train conscious response in situations where you have time. This training rewires your automatic responses, so even when there is no time, your actions are more aligned with your values and wisdom. Chapter 15. Living from Silence and the Ultimate Freedom. You have reached the end of this audiobook, but the beginning of a completely different way of living. Everything you have learned about mental silence is theoretical until you practice it consistently. The question is whether you will actually implement these practices or just file them away as interesting information that you do nothing with. Most people will choose the latter. They will acknowledge that mental silence sounds valuable, but they will never actually commit to the daily practice required to develop it. Their minds will remain chaotic, their thoughts will continue controlling them, and they will live their entire lives as slaves to mental chatter. Do not be most people. The power of silence is available to you, but only if you are willing to do the work to access it. Your immediate action step is simple. Begin a daily practice of thought observation and silence creation. Just 10 minutes per day is enough to start. Set a specific time and place. Make this non-negotiable. Track your practice daily. This consistency is essential. Within a few weeks of daily practice, you will notice changes. Thoughts will have less power over you. Mental chatter will decrease. Moments of silence will become more frequent. Within a few months, the changes become substantial. Your relationship with your thoughts fundamentally shifts. Within years, you develop capabilities that seem almost superhuman to people trapped in mental chaos. The path from mental chaos to mental mastery is well traveled. Millions of people throughout history have walked this path. The practices I have shared are tested and proven. They work if you work them. The choice is entirely yours. You can continue living with constant mental noise, believing every thought your mind generates, being controlled by anxiety and overthinking. Or you can commit right now to mastering mental silence and discovering the extraordinary clarity and power that exists in the gaps between thoughts. In silence, you are free. In silence, you are powerful. In silence, you access intelligence beyond thought. Welcome to the practice. Your transformation begins now. Chapter 15. Living from Silence and the Ultimate Freedom. You have reached the end of this audiobook, but the beginning of a completely different way of living. Everything you have learned about mental silence is theoretical until you practice it consistently. The question is whether you will actually implement these practices or just file them away as interesting information that you do nothing with. Most people will choose the latter. They will acknowledge that mental silence sounds valuable, but they will never actually commit to the daily practice required to develop it. Their minds will remain chaotic. Their thoughts will continue controlling them, and they will live their entire lives as slaves to mental chatter. Do not be most people. The power of silence is available to you, but only if you are willing to do the work to access it. Your immediate action step is simple. Begin a daily practice of thought observation and silence creation. Just 10 minutes per day is enough to start. Set a specific time and place. Make this non-negotiable. Track your practice daily. This consistency is essential. Within a few weeks of daily practice, you will notice changes. Thoughts will have less power over you. Mental chatter will decrease. Moments of silence will become more frequent. Within a few months, the changes become substantial. Your relationship with your thoughts fundamentally shifts. Within years, you develop capabilities that seem almost superhuman to people trapped in mental chaos. The path from mental chaos to mental mastery is well traveled. Millions of people throughout history have walked this path. The practices I have shared are tested and proven. They work if you work them. The choice is entirely yours. You can continue living with constant mental noise, believing every thought your mind generates, being controlled by anxiety and overthinking. Or you can commit right now to mastering mental silence and discovering the extraordinary clarity and power that exists in the gaps between thoughts. In silence, you are free. In silence, you are powerful. In silence, you access intelligence beyond thought. Welcome to the practice. Your transformation begins now.